Welcome, welcome to May She Flourish. This is our fourth webinar in this series, and if you've been to the other four, wonderful. If this is your first, that's even more wonderful. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our panelists today. And this time I'm going to start with Dr. Manuela Castigliegli. She is known and appreciated by many participants of our previous webinars. And she is an assistant research professor with Wellbeing at Work, Flourishing in Ministry. This research project, Wellbeing, believes that work should be meaningful and life-giving. The research is long-term and focuses on professionals in international development, global health, educators, and clergy. And of course, Manuela's specialty is women clergy. Manuela's research is the first major study to be done of women in mainline denominations in 20 years. Prior to joining the Wellness at Work project at the University of Notre Dame Mendoza School of Business, you can pull that up, she was a lecturer in practical theology at Newbold College of Higher Education, a lecturer in practical theology at Campus Adventista do Salvale, and a lecturer in practical theology at the Instituto Adventista Via Aurora. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Practical Theology from King's College in London. So thank you, Manuela, for providing the research and being part of our discussion today. We also have with us Dr. Karoline Lewis. She is the Marbury E. Anderson Chair in Biblical Preaching at Luther Seminary. She is an author of a number of books: Lay Preacher's Guide, How to Craft a Faithful Sermon, 5 Steps to Leading with Integrity, and one that's of particular interest to us today, entitled She, 5 Keys to Unlocking the Power of Women in Ministry. She has several projects going, but right now she's working on John and Method, Belonging, 5 Keys to Discipleship, and another one called Grace Upon Grace, a lectionary for the Gospel of John. She is an ordained Lutheran pastor and holds degrees from Northwestern University, Luther Seminary, and her PhD in New Testament Studies and Homiletics from Emory University. She is a program director of the Festival of Homiletics and a contributing writer to Working Preacher. She has a podcast, Sermon Brainwaves, and she leads conferences, workshops, and retreats internationally on her specialty, the Gospel of John. So we're very grateful, Karoline, that you are here. I know that you've had many women students who have benefited not only from your scholarship, but from your modeling and exemplifying what a woman pastor is and can be. And then we also have with us the Reverend Meredith Crigler. She's from the Diocese of Texas, and she serves as in the Diocese of Texas World Mission Board, which encourages global partnerships with the diocese, including companion relationships with Southern Malawi, Costa Rica, and North Dakota. She was ordained in the Diocese of Texas in 2010. She's currently the rector of Trinity Episcopal Church in Baytown, which also is home to parishioners who are served in the Caribbean islands. She graduated with majors, I love this, Meredith, in both neuroscience and religious studies from Claremont McKenna College in Southern California, and her MDiv is from Virginia Theological Seminary. And she's currently working on her DMin, and even doing that and being a rector and being the chair of the Diocese of Texas World Mission Board. She also is a mentor and instructor for Backstory Preaching, certified in Daring Way and Dare to Lead. As a facilitator, Meredith is passionate about mission, preaching, teaching, Sabbath, discernment, and daring systems. So thank you, Meredith, for being with us today and being part of this discussion. I know that you have talked with many women in the Episcopal Church, and I'm sure beyond, as preaching backstory and your mentoring. So this will be a rich, rich discussion. So Manuela, would you like to present to us your particular part of the research about what a woman pastor looks like?
Sure thing. Thank you. Okay, you have my screen now. Sorry. This is always kind of tests my technological skills. Okay, so you have here the explanation for what for the demand to share your favorite color of lipstick. I have to say this has been a particularly interesting conversation to prepare, and you probably will understand why and throughout the presentation. Throughout our interviews, one of the most puzzling and, in a way, widespread aspects of women's experiences as clergy persons was their quote-unquote visibility compared to their male colleagues. Clergywomen's body, clothing choices, voice, posture, and overall demeanor frequently made the object of a kind of extraordinary attention or more or less conscious surveillance, if you want, again, quote unquote. Women dealt with this unwanted visibility in different ways. For instance, this is a case that is very much typical, Andrea's reaction. It's a quote from our interview. I do feel that for women clergy, there is a higher expectation and a greater focus on appearance. There is a tendency for people to comment on my looks more than on those of my male colleagues. There might be comments about the clothes I'm wearing or how my hair is done. I've had a comment within the congregation that I'm serving that when I tend to wear my hair up, that might be considered a little bit more masculine looking. You know, like a bun on top of my head instead of letting my hair be long. Of course, that's the stereotype of feminine looking. That bun is more severe, gives me a more severe appearance or look, and I took that to mean severe as negative. And then she continues, working in the office, making visits, and then, of course, leading worship, I tend to be more dressed professional. If it is more of a laid-back event, such as bowling with the youth, I try to do jeans and a t-shirt or whatever. But I have encountered times when I have arrived at church functions in jeans and a t-shirt, and people didn't recognize me right away, which is interesting considering that it's the same face. And then she concludes, I guess subconsciously, I try to convey a clean appearance, put together, but also approachable. And I do try to watch out how revealing the clothing might be. If I'm going to be interacting with congregational members, I try to wear something that is more conservative. I mean, I'm not one to wear super low cut tops anyways, or really skimpy clothing. It does align with who I am, but there might be a couple of tops that I might rethink about because if I'm sitting and visiting, there are times that I sort of lean over and I'm thinking, okay, is this top gonna end up coming open a little? And so that does play in the back of my mind when I'm selecting my clothing. So a couple of remarks about what Andrea is saying and what many women actually are kind of repeating in their mind. Andrea's strange visibility is actually a common feature in our female participants' experiences. Male priests' body, demeanor, voice tone, and clothing choices generally go unnoticed. Male invisibility is not a coincidence. Instead, it is a privilege that signals the man's status as the default, the imaginary standard of the role. On the contrary, women's visibility and the extraordinary amount of subtle surveillance they experience indicates that when it comes to congregational leadership, female priests are at the same time insiders and outsiders in the word but still not exactly of the word. And this unwanted visibility and outsider-insider status are only multiplied and magnified when gender and ministry intersect other forms of alien trespassing, like race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or ability. You add what you may have in mind. So, couple of notes about the quote we read. The first and most striking aspect of Andrea and any clergy woman experience, actually, is that her embodiment of the minister's role makes her unusually visible, as signaled by her church members' comments about her hair. Their remarks are interesting because they focus primarily not on how she wears her hair, but on how she walks the line between masculine and feminine. A masculine look will not be frowned upon in a man, but Andrea's wearing her hair up, which partly kind of conceals one of the most stereotypical prominent feminine symbols, long hair, is perceived as severe and unpleasant. Her church members' remark implicitly are policing an invisible border between masculine and feminine. Wearing a vaguely masculine style is seen as a kind of threatening hybrid. Women that occupy a role that is traditionally embodied by men are often perceived as space invaders who need to camouflage their claims to authority by over-feminizing their appearance, wearing very feminine clothes. Reaffirming traditional gender expectations that list in their outward appearance helps women gain acceptance, reassures in an otherwise alien role. In your view, how should Andrea react to these comments? I launched the question and leave it up there. Second, the second part of Andrea's account explores her attempt to find a script that can reconcile her femininity with her clergy role. She speaks about wearing professional clothes. This is a complex task because the female body has traditionally been perceived as foreign and even unfit to ordain ministry. Women, differently from men, lack model script, if you will, that may reconcile two identities that have been historically considered as separate, being a woman and being a clergy person. Some women try to solve this conundrum by turning to what? Popular images, corporate images of female power. So the power suit, for instance, or a coat. This is very much Andrea's case. She tries to appear professional and put together, yet, keyword, approachable. One of the challenges for women in male-dominated professions is to find an image of female authority that may not be perceived negatively. Why? Scholars have suggested a whole repertoire of stereotypical scripts, if you want, women use to either accommodate expectations or challenge them. For instance, the school mom, the headmistress, the lady, the cat woman, the witch, or the bitch. I would like to have $1 for every time a clergy woman has said that she was being called bitchy because she was assertive, for instance. As repeatedly emphasized by research, the construction of authority role, a power image in masculine terms, this association between power and men, makes it difficult for female professionals to balance being seen as a competent leader and as sufficiently feminine not to be seen as breaking gender expectations and therefore being upsetting in a way. Other female priests turned to their clergy uniform, the priestly robe or a black shirt and collar, to visibly claim and embody their role. Uniforms in our research were simultaneously an expedient to avoid distractions and hide the body, and a symbol to assert authority. that invisibly gives you an idea that I am a priest, because I'm not instantly recognized as such. Yet in our interviewees' experiences, robes did not always work as expected. In multiple instances, for instance, they worked as a visual representation of women's outsiders' status, ill-fitting, male-shaped, too long, too bulky. They could also attract negative comments. It's a masquerade, or it's a doll. You look like a doll playing priest. And finally, the last part of Andrea's interview focuses on a recurrent struggle in women's attempts at reconciling gender and role. Andrea keeps her clothing and movements under close surveillance to avoid them being revealing. According to our studies, the psychological and practical consequence of women's unwanted visibility is a constant work of self-monitoring for fear that their body may become an object of unwanted sexual attention. Historically, women have been overdetermined by their bodies. They have been associated to their biological and sexual functions, and they have been defined by them. And I would say not only defined, but confined by their sexual functions, or the reproductive function. And so assigned to specific domains and cut out of public relevance. So you are a mother, or you're a sexual object, you don't speak for the universe, because the universe belongs to men. Andrea's attempt at avoiding being sexualized are at the same time an effort to escape that cage, and a recognition that still, as documented by plenty of materials in our research, women's bodies are used still to push them back into stereotypical and often degrading positions. It's an easy way for a woman to receive a sexualized comment because it puts that woman in place and silence her. Given our limited space, it is impossible to do justice to the many creative strategies that clergy women use every day to embody ministry in ways that reshape and stretch stereotypes and expectations. I don't want to paint women just as subjects and passive receivers of these attitudes. Women are stretching these scripts. In our research, more than 1/3 of our female interviewees showed a clear awareness of the dynamics we have just seen in Andrea's testimony, and engaged in small, ordinary acts of defiance to reconcile their femininity and their role. They intentionally turned this uncomfortable visibility into a platform that allowed them to deconstruct, rewire ministry in the shape of a woman's body and presence. So they turned their Black robes into original creations by accessorizing them in creative ways. They subverted traditions by wearing colorful shoes on the pulpit and accessories. They showed up in their pregnant bodies, or incarnated their preaching into women's very ordinary and sometimes physical experiences. They named the unnamed, if you want. Many of them received some pushback, some form of pushback, sometimes heavy pushback, but they still persisted, as someone said, and they still continued to subvert the script. As we continue this webinar discussion, 2 points seem particularly crucial. First, clergy women need to be aware of the tensions. Some of them I've tried to reconstruct just a few minutes ago, underline their attempts at reconciling being a woman and a priest in a male-shaped tradition. What scripts and languages are they using? Why do they choose them? Can they embody their role and authority without concealing their identity as women? Second, congregations need to be educated to understand better what makes women unusually visible to their eyes. Are there ways for the church to turn women's uncomfortable visibility into an opportunity to learn and grow? And these are probably very good questions. I'm sure that will spark a lot of discussion as I leave the floor for the others to speak.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Manuela. Watching the chat as you were talking, I noticed a lot of resonant experience from what you found in your research. But I would like to ask Meredith and Karoline, does your experience as a woman pastor, as a woman priest, reflect what Manuela has found in her research? Karoline, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Absolutely, yes. On really every single point that you named, Manuela, and going back and thinking about my experiences over the years, I can think of an example or many examples, not just one, but many examples of each and every one of the experiences that you name. And it's those kinds of things that in the larger picture of being a woman in ministry, we tend to kind of push off and say, well, it's not that big of a deal. But I've equated it to microaggressions, that after a while, when the only assessment of you is your appearance and not what you have to say or how you lead or how you preach or those constructive and content-oriented realities of doing ministry, you begin to question that yourself. And so the issue here is so much more, right, than what you wear and how you wear it. It's yes, it's making those choices, but it's also realizing what you're going into because of that. And at what point where are there resources for you to name that you're just buried under those microaggressions. So that's my first response to Manuela's presentation.
Yeah. And I hope is not, we can't cover it today, but we come up with some good responses. That's Manuela's script to those microaggressions. Mm-hmm. So Meredith, does what Manuela found in her research, does that resonate with your experience?
Yes, it does. And I found myself resonating with different aspects of that script, depending on where I was in my life and where I was in my ministry. So I've been ordained now about a dozen years. And I think about the time when I first came out and I was trying very much to be that professional, like hair back, suit, nice, person, and to see myself transition through those different iterations. And I'm very much now at that kind of subversive, dismantle it, rewrite the script person. Like I'm like, oh, I am wearing a low cut shirt right now. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Right. Like that's kind of where I am. And I think part of it for me is it's about story. And I love story and I love studying story. And so many ways I think that we as women have been in that place of victim in a story. And we can choose to move out of that in one way, shape, or form. Right? We can become villains, we can become heroes, we can become guides. And in my mind, we have the potential to really create something new. And so how do we rise? And I think that's that piece of your research around being subversive and dismantling it is the opportunity to create something new. And that is where I find myself today. And I'm like, if there is a way that we can change that script, if we can change that piece, I'm all in for that. So thank you.
So following on that and changing the story, Meredith, what could Andrea do when she's told she should look more like a man, or when she's told that she should look more like a man of authority and less like a woman? All those things to me are in the shades of the things that she was told by her parishioner, particularly by putting her hair up. So putting ourselves in Andrea's shoes, what do you think we could do to change the story?
So I think for me, I'm going to think that Andrea is this precious and beloved woman and child of God. And I've got a little bit of a mother hen instinct to me that I want to kind of protect her and be fierce about it. But mostly at the end of the day, it's wherever she is, I want her to have some self-compassion and a place of some empathy that like, what should she do? Possibly nothing. Just the thing that is the most loving to her in that place and that time. Do I hope that she can grow out of that, grow to a place where she is, flourishing in ministry, so to say? Yes. And I hope that that looks like being able to get to the point where she can kind of interrupt some of those assumptions. But I don't know about others, but sometimes when you're in that moment, all you can do is just be the most loving person you can be to yourself. And then you go forward from there. So to me, I don't think Andrea is in a place from what you've written as this fictitious person that she's like, yes, I'm now going to change the world and belong to myself and all of these things. Like, nah, just like the one little thing, I'm going to celebrate that to the nth degree.
Yeah, great. Karoline, what do you think? And I will say that, at least for myself, I've been in those moments and of course have not responded in the way that I thought about 20 minutes later, right? In the moment, it's hard, but so.
Well, that's the thing, right? It is hard in the moment. And I love that suggestion, Meredith, of self-compassion and self-care in saying this is all I can do, or I can't, I wish I could come up with a really pithy and appropriate kind of thing to say, but often you're still, I don't know, I still find myself, and I've been doing this for a long time, caught off guard. Wait, what did you just say? You still can't believe it. And so, but there's two things that I think about and sort of an overall strategy. Maybe not directly saying something to that person, because you're always trying to navigate what the future relationship is going to be like how much do I say? Because it depends on, like, do I say, well, you're an idiot because I'm never going to see you again, or am I going to see you tomorrow at Bible study, right? So you're always trying to navigate that, which takes an extraordinary amount of energy. But with some of these microaggressions that are about appearance, sometimes what I find helpful is like also microaggressions that are deeply sexist, or that are like mansplaining or just embedded sexism. I find it really helpful to have a vocabulary for it, that I can name it. And so if somebody is, basically does an act of mansplaining, I just go, oh, mansplainer, and move on with my day. And that's one thing that I do. The other thing is and I talk about this in my book, I have girlfriends where I can say, I love texting, because something will happen. I'll say, well, let's put, put this in the list of these things that happened to you. Right. And so I'll text a girlfriend right away. And I just and then in doing that, I just kind of let it go. There's something about like texting somebody and saying, you're not going to believe this. And then it's just gone. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Yes, I can't believe it. Of course. What else do you expect? And there's something about letting that go in the moment. Those are just two things that I think about for Andrea and for all of us.
Great. Yeah. So that's where Andrea is in her being. But to what degree do you think the clergy woman should be responsible for the education of the person that's making these comments, or what women's embodied leadership looks like? Right? If we're experiencing it, then to what degree should we also be the ones that are saying, you know what, that's not an appropriate comment? Obviously, you can't always say that in the moment, but taking it in the reverse. Meredith?
Sure. So I'm actually at the point that phrase, that's inappropriate, is something that rolls off my tongue a lot. And I think it's a rare at this point that's not something I would say. And we could wander together beyond that, but I think that's a very helpful, those words that you said, I think are very helpful, because it interrupts that story. And it kind of just names, like, no, that's not okay to say. That's inappropriate. And for me, 2 words is about sometimes all I can muster, all I can personally get out, and
Yeah.
it's there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
think,
Karoline, what have you said?
yeah, I think that's where, you go back to Meredith's comment about self-compassion, self-compassion, what can you actually muster in the moment, and to be okay with what you can. But you're raising a larger issue, Carol, of course, the subterranean reality of all of this is the deep-seated systemic sexism and misogyny that exists in the church. And our churches and our churches' structures thrive on it. And they have for years and years and years. And until there is deliberate deconstruction, I think, at system institutional levels, with regard to sexism. This, I noticed in the chat, well, he's of a different generation. It's still going to happen. It's still going to be a constant. And so, I've been working with the BC Synod, British Columbia Synod, on how they've chosen to be an anti-sexist synod. And so you put it out in the wider conversation, right? That this is something to which we are committed, as an institution or as a church. But even in your local congregation, who are the persons who have your back? Not that you necessarily need that. I get worried about that because I've got a savior and I don't need you to be you. I don't need you to be mine. I lift weights and I can, probably deadlift you or throw you across the room, depending. But at the same time, it's a place of unity with regard to how do we do leadership, and that this is not something we're going to tolerate, because it's certainly not healthy and not a place of thriving. But this is not how we are with each other, that we view people as beloved children of God. Right. And are we starting from there, or are we starting from these scripts that we've been socialized to be and to know? Right.
If I can add
so go ahead, Manuela, because I'm wondering if people in your study have had, whether you heard some of these responses, how they handled it, or maybe there was something else that you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I think, yes, absolutely. There were different kinds of responses. I think that thinking of this, framing this in a conversation of microaggressions helps us, but there are also limitations, because they place a woman at the receiving end of a traumatic kind of experience. There is a side of this conversation that has to do with that is personal, and it has to do with the objective damage that this even for me, one of the most painful things to hear in Andrea's conversation, in the conversation with Andrea, was this constant self-monitoring for fear of being sexualized. Well, in fact, she's not even responsible for being turned into a sexual object, that she cannot forbid other people from you can be turned into a sexual object even if you are wearing a shield, a complete shield. It depends on the other person. So this taking responsibility for other thoughts, for other people's thoughts. So there is this kind of traumatic kind of stress that is constantly going on in the head of many women, Meredith was mentioning the fact of the freezing response. For instance, for many women that comes unexpected, and so when they receive a comments of that kind about their visibility, a surveillance of their body, they are shocked and they don't know how to handle it. That's why at the end of my presentation I say, it should not come as a surprise anymore. I mean, and that comes from a poor pattern in our seminaries in presenting the church as an entity that doesn't need to talk about this kind of issues. That's what Karoline was saying. It comforts me to see that the synod decides to become an anti-sexist synod, exactly like the Episcopal Church, for instance, is campaigning to become an anti-racist entity, because we are not past of certain problems. And so they need to be part of the conversation, because we do have a problem, and the sooner we admit it, the better it is. So women are not surprised anymore by this double kind of discourse that, hey, we are Episcopal or we are Lutherans, we are beyond this. It's not true, and it needs to be discussed. The second thing is that one of the best ways to create a cultural change is to make, and that's the point I wanted to raise, when you receive that comment, remember it's not about you, even if it hurts. It's about cultural change. It's about a birthing process, if you want, in the church that has gone a long way from being explicitly and vocally offensive to women. Before, you will get the face-to-face insults or rejection for being a woman in a pulpit. Now you get it has become unacceptable, but you get these echoes of a stereotypical culture that is harder to die, because people see things in simplified terms. So you need to look like a woman, and you need to be meek, and you need to be submissive, and you need, and if you are not, you are bitchy, and so on. And I don't even start talking about race and how, for instance, Black women are treated sometimes as the angry women, or I've heard a lot of, for instance, lesbian clergy women who speak about how the stereotype of the angry lesbian is applied to them. So it is hurting, but it's also about cultural change, and it's about deconstructing the threat. One of the ways to come back at these kind of things is to say, to feign not understanding. Say, can you please repeat this, for instance? Why did you say that? And it force the other person to explain what is taken for granted in what they have just said, and take it at a certain point to start a conversation. That is also one of the things that many women did, or had kind of distilled as an approach.
Yeah. So I want to get to some questions in the chat, but before I do that, there's been a couple of comments in the chat about how some other women have helped other women handle this. So if we can just talk about ways in which, what are some of the ways in which each of you sees how women can help our colleagues, right now, just let's focus on women colleagues, to be aware that what they're really experiencing isn't about them. It really is a microaggression. Somebody said it's even worse than that in the chat. But what can we do with and for one another? What resource can we be for one another? Do you want to answer that first, Manuela, if you saw any of that in your research?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
What kind of resource can we be for one another?
Yeah.
In not only just naming that this is going on, but finding a way to, as Meredith says, change the story.
Yes, I mean, one of the great resources, I think Karoline pointed that out. One of the ways women reacted was, first of all, to normalize the situation, but not normalize in the sense of accepting it, but having support, building support structures like friendships with other women that could, first of all, contribute to share this kind of experiences, and also share the pain in some cases, but also see them as a recurrent pattern, something that belongs to the culture of, and so that needs to be taught not just in emotional terms, but in more strategic terms. Another thing that is very important is having honest conversations with male colleagues about allyship, and trying to build the cooperation with men about how to model a different and more constructive kind of attitude. The third thing is that there are some materials about microaggressions, for instance, that and we are going to talk about microaggressions next time, that explore some of the strategies you can use to confront constructively microaggressions and turn them into teachable moments, or at least untrigger them. So, and we are going to discuss that next time, but there are some, especially in the area of anti-racism, we can send the materials and resources about that. Groups have worked a lot on how to deconstruct or dismantle aggressions by using strategies that actually put the attacker on defensive and ask the attacker to justify the attack or to rationalize it a little bit more.
Right. Take it out of the moment and put it more in the head.
So what are you really trying to say here? Why are you saying it?
And Mary Beth has put in the chat to sign up for the next webinar if you're interested about microaggressions. But Karoline and Meredith, briefly, Karoline, we'll go to you first. What resources do you think women can be for one another? Well, and before she answers, before she answers that for our participants, please, you can use the Q&A if you have some specific questions. I've been trying to follow the chat and Mary Beth has been following it, but there is a Q&A function too that'll raise your questions up. So sorry, Karoline.
No, my first thing, I actually just put it in the chat, but I think it has been I think there needs to be an intentionality on our part to where are going to be those spaces and places where we gather together as women and do this kind of work and being together. I have a group of women with whom I graduated from seminary, and that was 25 years ago. And we all happen to be in the same area, and we get together on a regular basis. And just that constancy and that commitment to be together. And I led a retreat in the summer that was about she and leadership, and it's making that time. It's saying this goes back to Meredith's self-care, but it's like it's you're putting those people around you. Emily Towns says that have people around you who can tell you when they see pieces of you drifting away. And then I've kind of added to Emily Towns, but I would never add to Emily Towns, but just like it theoretically, that and who are those people that you gather around you who tell you you are really rocking it, you are really being you are really embodying who you are in ministry. I think those are key things for me.
That's great. Yep, connection and that sense of deep support, not just
deep support.
Okay, but deep support. Meredith, briefly, and then we're going to get to the Q&A.
Sure. I think the only thing that I'd add to that, other than just saying yes, 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 like have your friends, see your friends, prioritize those colleagues, is I think also a normalizing of that support, right? So much, at least in the circles in the world in which I live, there's a secrecy around getting help or support that I think it's really, that's something we could also do, is normalize spiritual directors and therapists and coaches and mentoring groups and friends, and that is a part of our work and our ministry and our life, that there's a piece of that that's really important as well. So that, I think that would be my addition to what's already been said.
Yeah, that's not an extra. That's a needed part. Yeah. So, okay. So I know, Mary Beth, is there one in particular that you've seen come through the chat or into the Q&A? I'm not seeing, there's no open questions in what I'm seeing on my screen.
Well,
So,
I was just going to, with Meredith, what she just said about normalizing, I think that is so important. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Carol, about the scripts that we find ourselves in, and we're certain characters in those scripts. And a lot of those scripts need to be rewritten. And I'll never forget that when I first went to therapy and with Brenda, my therapist, like also a long time ago, and saw her for a really, really, really long time, because there were like scripts that I had to change about my life. And that's part of what we're doing. But we need each other to rewrite those scripts, and to be able to see each other as different characters in those scripts. And I think that's but that's generative and life-giving work too. But that's, I think, also what's going to change the conversation. So just wanted to follow up the script thing.
And so here's a question in the Q&A. And I think close women colleagues that you trust are key in helping to rewrite those scripts. It's not something that we can just do in our heads. So one of them is, can Karoline tell more about the drifting away quote? Whence it come? You're still on mute.
It was
Karoline.
it was a quote. Thanks for that. I went to a women in leadership conference. This was a number of years ago when I first started at Luther, that was put on by ATS, the Association for Theological Schools. And Emily Towns was one of the presenters. And I wrote down that quote, and I've had it next to me ever since. And that was probably like 2008 or 2009. And it so resonated with me to pick out who are the people I'm going to have by my side, who are going to tell me and say, when Karoline, what's happening? Where are you? or the flip side, how you are really embodying your full truth now. And so it's a quote that I wrote down in my notes at a conference a long time ago. Yeah.
And it sounds like it still feeds you. It still really
absolutely.
Yeah.
And in a lot of different, I'll stop there.
Yeah. So the other question in the Q&A is, can you go ahead and share some good responses to a microaggression to shut it down and to educate? Think of it as a teaser for the next session. So Manuela, do you want to maybe, not revealing too much about what we're going to focus on next time, but do you have some things that you can offer now?
There are three main avenues to disarm a microaggression. One is, and it's really key, that's what I was mentioning before. One is to make what is invisible or taken for granted visible. In the case of Andrea, for instance, when a church congregant says, "Oh, you look so much better with your hair down. You look more masculine and kind of severe with your hair up." One of the strategies to say, what are you really saying about that? What do you mean? Basically, it's coming back and asking for a clarification, and trying pushing the other person without being aggressive to explain what is invisible, that is taken for granted and implicit in what they are saying, and start a conversation from there. Another more, and these approaches really depend on the occasion and also on the tone of the conversation, because obviously if someone, as it happens, is making an appreciation about how beautiful the legs of their pastor are, it is very different than making a comment about how your hair looks, because there are different severities in these comments. Another way of disarming is expressing disagreement, is saying, "Don't you dare," for instance, and just voicing out a negative reaction to a comment that is clearly out of line. And that is also a way for the attacker to back up, basically, and being destabilized and having to start a conversation about that. Or, for instance, if you don't want to be confrontational, try to describe or rephrase what is happening, like, well, let me understand what you are saying. Is that what you are saying? This, and this. And again, that's a way for you to open a conversation. And depending on how confrontational you want to be, but you can choose different, or you can use an exclamation, like if someone makes a very, very unpleasant comment about you, say, ouch, I don't really like that. And start again, try to disarm and to interrupt the cycle instead of freezing and just going back and ruminating on what happened. But sometimes, I mean, these strategies are strategies we normally apply in life, but because we are in a situation that is very ambiguous between being a carer of the person who is likely making that kind of comment. I mean, remember, you are in a very, very difficult situation because you're supposed to be the pastor, the carer, so you have to be kind and not respond. So sometimes confronting this kind of issues is also complicated by the fact that you are in that kind of position. That is at the same time the one who is the offended and has to do justice, but also the carer. Which one of the roles do you choose? So sometimes making a verbal exclamation or asking the person or rephrasing the observation may be an avenue to kind of intervene and correct. And lastly, it's to educate the offender, for instance, understanding from or trying to understand from where they come from. Say, instead of being confrontational, let's say, I understand that this is your assumption, but this is what I see.
Right.
So, or differentiate between the intent. I see that you may have meant well, but this is the way, the thing that is conveyed by your comment.
Right.
And so these are a couple of, if that is a teaser, it was
okay
to start a conversation last time.
So, yeah. So yes, we'll have a very rich conversation next time too. So this one, I'm going to ask Karoline and Meredith to answer because it has to do with what seminaries can do. A colleague of mine at Lifelong Learning, she says, what would you suggest seminaries do to prepare women clergy for this, recognizing that it's unlikely this will be a significant part of the official curriculum? And I would also add to that, once women are in a call, what are some things that they can do? Where do they make sure they carry forward a women's group? Do they, look to some kind of continuing education that would help with that? But what are some things that can do that can prepare women for recognizing this?
So I'll
Meredith,
start briefly, since I'm not in a seminary, but I've had experience as, from the student side. One of the things I think that still has some work to do is to really take an intentional look at the policies and the customs of the seminary now, right? Not in Virginia, but in another unnamed, beautiful, wonderful seminary in our diocese, in the Episcopal Church, still requires people to wear certain shoes and have their hair look a certain way when you're at the altar. That's not okay. That's inappropriate. So I think a start is looking at our own customs and our own practices and our own policies and doing some self-policing among our own institutions. And that goes for seminaries, that goes for boards and foundations, right? It goes to any kind of institution or any place. And seeing these in the comments, I think some of the most inappropriate comments I receive are from fellow clergy. And we should know better. Right. And so how do we interrupt that story?
Yeah. So, and Karoline, what would you say? Because I know you used to teach a class on this at one time.
I did. And that's how I am a woman in ministry, but I had not taught the class at all. And it was taught by another woman who was leaving the seminary. And so when we were talking about, I was on a program curriculum committee, and we were talking about what classes to offer the next year. And the assumption was that, well, we won't offer women in ministry more because the person who was teaching it is leaving. And I'm like, what? No, I'll teach it. And, raised my hand and signed up and taught it about 5 years, but I haven't taught it now for 5 years. Because I can. I mean, I'm in an overload situation already because it's not a required piece of the curriculum, and it's still thought of as an issue. But I think, until there is, it goes back to my comment earlier, until there is really intentional systemic changes with regard to curriculum. And even the unsaid curriculum, but until that, or in my particular church, first call theological education. To be honest, I think it's a complete lack of reality and imagination that the church is not saying, okay, for all of our clergy in first call, this should be what they take. That they should have a seminar, or we need a workshop on sexual harassment and sexism and misogyny and being a woman in ministry. But until it's located within the system itself, it's just, it'll always be sidelined.
It'll keep going.
And I remember, teaching the class, and students would email me back, like they went on internship, and they're like, wait, everything we talked about is happening to me. I'm like, yes, that's why we're talking about it. So you're not blindsided. And you still will be. I still am, but.
Right. I think that's an important note to leave it on. As much experience as we may have, and as much as we're, knowing that we're rewriting the story and interrupting it, there's still going to be moments that we're going to really be surprised when somebody makes a comment like that, that's inappropriate. I actually think that's a good thing. It's sad that it's happened, but I'm actually glad it still surprises us, because we still have heart, and then we still have imagination to keep going and to push back against it. So I want to thank all of you. Karoline, Meredith, thank you so much for being with us. Manuela, again, another wonderful, wonderful part of your research. And Mary Beth Sanders, she is behind the scenes making all of this happen. So you can't see her on the screen, but she's been wonderful through this entire series and each session to have everything go smoothly. So Mary Beth, is there a slide that we can put up about the next one? But there she is, about March 2nd. So the next webinar is March 2nd at 3 p.m., Strategies for Fighting Everyday Sexism. So I hope that you can make that one and be part of the ongoing discussion. Reach out to your sisters who you think this also might be helpful. You can take any one of these webinars. You don't have to do them in a series. So you might know somebody for whom particularly this is important. So looking forward to seeing you next month, and very, very grateful for the wisdom that's been shared today. Thank you, everybody.